All right, I just finished building these. I'll show you how. Set this up. All right, gonna go over how I build my stairs and the things that are very crucial to take account of and my process for putting them together. So in this particular situation, I have got 8-foot walls, a 11 7/8 floor system, and I've got a set of stairs that have a landing in the center. So I've got a turn in the middle of the stairs. So first order of business, my total height is the number I'm going to start with. So I have measured that from the top of my subfloor to the subfloor that I'm standing on. That total rise is 109 5/8. Now, this is a number you can typically work with if you have the same flooring material throughout the entire project. However, on this particular job, we've actually got in-floor heated tile on the bottom and then vinyl on the stairs on the upper floor. So my floor thickness on the bottom floor is 3/4. On the stairs and upper floor, it's only 1/4 of an inch. So that means the math for calculating my rise per step is a 1/2 inch less. So I've got to take that 1/2 inch into account for my math. So what I've done is gone 109 5/8 minus a 1/2 inch, which gets my total stair rise down to 109 1/8. To determine how many rises you're actually going to have, what I always do is I take my total height and I divide that by 7.5. So in North America and Canada here, our maximum rise is about 7 7/8. So 7 3/4 or 7.5 is kind of a ballpark number. So I can do 109 1/8 divided by 7.5, and that gives me 14 point something. So I know then I've got 14 rises. So then I take 109 1/8 divided by 14, and that gives me 7.79 or just over 7 3/4. The run on these stairs is determined on the plans, and they've asked for a 10-inch run. And being that there is vinyl and nosings going on after the fact, I'm gonna have no nosings on my stairs. They'll be square and they'll be added after the fact. I also build my stairs so they have a solid 1-inch plywood deck on them, and the flooring goes on top. I know some people in some locations will put their flooring material on the rise and on the run, and there's nothing underneath it except for the stringers. So I have got 14 risers at 7.79 or 7 3/4 heavy, and I've got 13 treads in total at 10 inches. I've got to subtract one tread because I've got a landing. So that landing right there represents one of my treads. And then in order to set the height of my landing, I've used this math to determine where that thing goes. So I've taken my 109 1/8, I divided that by 14, and then multiplied it by my number of rises coming down to set the top of that landing perfect. And then I'm now building 2 sets of stairs, one for the bottom and one for the top. And then I'll get into the laying out of the stringers up top, where I take into account the difference in floor thickness for my bottom rise and the plywood backing that butts into my sheathing so that my corners are all nice. So we'll go over that up top. So my bottom set here is 8 rises and 7 runs. My top set is 6 rises and 5 runs. Okay, over the years, I used to build all of my stairs using 2x12 for my stringers, and then several years back, I switched over to 1 3/4 LVL because it is deadly. It has no cupping, twisting, wane doesn't shrink, super, super strong. To me, it's a very justifiable added expense to the process, so I use 1 3/4 by 11 7/8 LVL for my stringers. I use 1-inch standard grade plywood and rip that down for my treads, and I use 3/4 inch plywood for my risers, and then I back their intersection with 2x2 at the intersection. So you'll see that here shortly, but now we're gonna go over laying out the stringer. All right, so to lay out this stringer, first thing I've done is I have set up my rafter square, my framing square with my stair gauges on here. And this is incredibly crucial. So before I put my stair gauges on, I'll actually set this up, draw a line, and I will measure from end to end, make sure that I'm absolutely perfect. So that way I know my gauges are perfect, because as you work your way along here, you can either grow or shrink your measurements, meaning that your rise and your run are funny, your stairs aren't level, and your math gets all messed up. So this is incredibly crucial. These are perfect. So once you get a couple marks made, you can confirm that those are bang on. So I needed 7 3/4 here, which is exactly what I've got for my rise, and my runs are 10 inches. So this way we've got exactly 10 inches right there. I'm actually just a touch over, which is what I actually want. Okay, so for laying this out now, I'm gonna start with the bottom set, which is 8 risers and 7 runs. And I have to add a 1/2 inch to my bottom rise to make up for the floor thickness on the main floor. So down here, I have got my rise marked. Now there's extra things to take into account at the bottom rise and the top rise. Actually the bottom rise and the top run being that they are being overlapped with plywood, depending how you're hanging and mounting your stairs. So in this case, because I'm adding that 1/2 inch, that's gonna mean that this is a 1/2 inch bigger, but I have to remove my 1 inch thickness for plywood at the top. So in this case, I'm gonna have a rise at this end. If I mark this here, let's hang this over 1 inch, that represents my 1 inch plywood, would be right there. And from there down, 7 3/4 would be my mathematical rise. And then I've got an extra 1/2 inch here, which is making up for the floor thickness down below to make sure that all of these rises work out. So now I'm gonna just work my way up and count my treads in regards to my bottom set, which is 8 rise, 7 runs. So I've got 1, 2, and I'm gonna actually line this line up with my 10-inch mark on the square to make sure those are all perfect. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is my last one now. Now because of how my plywood and my rise and run is overlapping, I actually need to take off 3/4 inch of my run here because this will not be covered with the rise on top. It's going to be hung with the rise on the back. So I'm going to remove 3/4 here, and then I'm going to actually square that line down. Because in this location, I'm gonna have 3/4 inch plywood mounted to the back, sticking up here, that's gonna hang this set of stairs from the landing. Okay, now we're gonna do that again for the top set of stairs. So once again, I'm gonna go and get a couple of these rise and run marked. One there, one here. And in this case now, I'm gonna actually mark where my rise goes. I'm gonna mark 10 on here. So this is now my bottom rise, right there. And this is traditionally where my bottom of my rise would be, but I'm gonna take off 1 inch for the thickness of my plywood riser on the top. So I'm gonna mark 1 inch right here. And that represents the actual bottom of my stringer. Pull that through there. So you can see now if I put hang my tape over 1 inch for the thickness of my tread, I've got 7 3/4 for my total rise. So now I'm going to count my way to the top. So my top set has 6 rises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And once again, I'm going to take off 3/4 of my run to account for the plywood backing that will hang the stairs. Square that down there. And now I've got my first piece of my stringer. I'll be doing 3 stringers for each set of stairs, but those are now basically my templates. I'm gonna cut those out and then use those as a template for marking my other ones. That way I guarantee they're all identical. You don't wanna lay out every one with your square because if you grow or shrink in your layout, they won't match up. Some people will also stack all 3, cut them all together, but if the shoe on your saw and your blade isn't deadly perfect, if your blade is kicked off of square a little bit, they might not match up perfect. So I prefer to cut one of each and then use those as templates to mark the other ones. Okay, before you start cutting any of your stringers, do some quick double checks. Make sure you've got the correct number of rise and run. I just did that and realized I have an extra run. I forgot to take off the run for the landing. So I'm actually gonna take this layout here, move it back 1 rise and run, and I'm good to go. Much easier done now than once you get them all built, everything all put together, you go to drop them in, you got an extra rise or too few. So check it before you cut it. also don't overcut my cuts with the circular saw. I'll leave them right tight to the line and then finish off the cut with a jigsaw to get nice clean corners. All right, just about to cut down some sheathing for stair treads. This is 1 inch thick standard grade plywood. And I use a skill saw, a circular saw, to cut my treads to length, and I'll use a table saw to cut them to width, because the width is critical for your laps to be nice. Length can be plus or minus a 1/16 or so, wouldn't really matter. So this is the easiest way I found to do it. All right, so stringers are all cut and prepped. Next thing I do is put all my riser material on. I do the treads in place. So for the risers, what I do is make sure that they are cut. They set the width of the stairs. So I make sure that my stairs are always 1.5 inches narrower than the stairwell opening. And then I put a 1x2 or 3/4 inch spacer on either side of the stringer to space it off the wall so I can still anchor it. That allows a cavity for drywall to be slid in there with some wiggle room. So I need to mark center of these to set my center stringer. So I'll just square these all up. And these are 34.5, I believe. Yep, so 17.25 is center. 17.25 is center. I'm using 11/7/8, so back 7/8 of an inch will put me at the edge. So I'm gonna square that. Mark those. And I will square over on the back side down on a few of them anyway, so that I can make sure that the stringers stay totally parallel and vertical. So those are all the standard ones. I've got 4 unique ones here as well. I'm gonna get into it here now. So I'll set these guys aside. So I have got my bottom 2 rises, which are different than the rest because they've taken into account the thickness of the 1 inch riser, because there's no other riser butting into the bottom of them, as well as the 1/2 inch difference at the bottom of the stairs due to a different floor thickness. So layout on these will be the same, but I got to make sure I put these on the right set of stringers so I don't screw that up. So I'll just mark centers on these and then we'll get into the taller ones. There's those 2 down. Now, the way I like to hang and mount my stairs is that I hang them with 3/4 inch plywood. So my stringer is going to butt in here, it'll be glued and screwed into the backside, and then the stairs hang on this. So the top portion of this hanger is my top rise. So I need to take into account the thickness of the 1 inch tread, as well as the 3/4 inch sheathing on my floor system that will overhang this to lock this all together nice. So I gotta snap some lines and make some marks on here. So I'm gonna hang my tape over 3/4 of an inch, which represents the top of my sheathing. And then I'm gonna go 1 inch beyond my rise because of the 1 inch plywood is gonna butt in there. And there is the top of my stringer is gonna be right there. So then from that it's 8 inches down, 8 inches down. And I can scribe that across there. Like that. And then I just have to set center of my stringer. So again, I'll keep doing this. 17.25, back 7/8. Right there. So that now is the hanger at the back. This will be my rise, and it'll be the 1 inch plywood and the plywood over top, and then I'll have my stringers mounted in right here. Okay, time to mount my rises on here. I'm gonna glue all the rises, then I'll spread these out, lay my rises in, and nail them all on. So here we go. time to slide these in. Everything is built, treads will go on once they're in, so I'll slide this down in there, tack it in place, put the treads on it, give me access to put the bottom set in. So let's drop her in. Gonna put on a new rig here, my DH8 and an L Mini for all the screwing. So that's gonna be this little guy. First time I put actually a good bit of time into the use of it on the job site. It was awesome. If you want to lock it, there's a strap you can pull out here, snap it in there so it can't come out, and then that's retractable under there. And yeah, it works really nice. All right, time to screw the treads on. A couple things I make sure to do is I glue everything here, and I put glue on the bottom of the riser right here. And I'll make sure that before I put this tread on, I put a couple screws in from the back so I have access to it. And I'll be angling screws a bit here to true things up as I go. The stairs are just hung by the top, so there is a little bit of play if I needed it. I can basically boot these around, toe screw, and get things all real nice and flush. Watch that glue squeeze out of there. That looks good there. Again, no nosings on these because that will be done with the finished material later. Suck that in tight. There's glue all coming out there now. 3 into each stringer. And then I'll put one down to each of the 2x2s in the face. And now while I've got access, instead of coming up from the back after the fact, I can just put a screw in from the back side right in here. There. Now that tread is anchored all the way around. That's going nowhere. No squeaks, no bounce. Treads are all on, things are squared up. I can boot them around a little bit to just get them right where I want them. I'll post screw them down and then put a few GRKs into the studs. That's going nowhere.
You know why?
Huh?
It's because of that.
Yeah, there you go. All right, there's the 101 on Luke's stairs. That's how I like to build them. That's evolved over probably about 400 houses in now, something like that. I've built hundreds of sets of stairs. Stairs are something that I find is kind of like the framer's signature on the house. If I want to know how a guy framed and what his quality is like, what he cares about, stairs is something I'm going to pay attention to. These are very overbuilt. I'm fully aware of that. You probably do them very differently. That's great. This is how I like to do them. Hopefully it's helpful.